The really sad part is, almost every company, it feels like, does a survey these days. You think, well, at least they're capturing this data via survey. I'm going to really share my feedback. And the dirty secret in the customer service world is that most of the surveys we fill out are used for nothing more than reporting an average number in a management meeting. They're not actually using that data to take action. So the feedback we share as customers, unfortunately, is often meaningless, and companies are bypassing a gold mine of process improvement opportunities.
Hi, everybody. I'm Elizabeth Swan.
And I'm Tracy O'Rourke.
And we are both from GoLeanSixSigma.com, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast, where we wrestle with tough questions. We talk to thought leaders. We discuss great books with authors, and we get insights from Lean Six Sigma practitioners.
And we let you in on helpful apps, bring you the news, and challenge the status quo so you can build your problem-solving muscles. Okay, Elizabeth, I expected service with a smile. So what's on the menu?
Trust me, I am smiling because today's special is my interview with author and customer service thought leader, Jeff Toyster, who gives a behind-the-scenes look at the obstacles to excellent customer service and how some of them can be addressed with process improvement. Jeff is a great storyteller, so stay tuned for that. We'll start off with our appetizer, which is an app called Clockify. It's an integrated time tracker with superpowers. Today's Q&A is a forum question from a leader who's worried that online training is not enough to sustain a culture of continuous improvement. And for the printed page, we'll share a review of Jeff Toyster's latest book, Getting Service Right. We've got opinions about everything. It's a great day at the cafe, Tracy.
Very excited to look forward to. No, that sounds awesome. Remember to stay tuned for this month's coupon code in order to get a discount on GoLeanSixSigma.com online training.
It's time for an appetizer.
Okay, Elizabeth, so this time tracker has superpowers, right?
Right. It's called Clockify, and it has an easy-to-use time tracker, but it also has a lot of other integrated features. Our team tracks task time because they need to understand the lead times, they need to be able to manage their workloads, but also they need to bring new people on board. So they need to be able to tell them how to manage their time and how long everything should take. They also track their task times to set baselines to then beat. Our team is crazy good at 5S'ing their emails, and I'm always in awe of their productivity, and they just keep getting faster.
They do. They are awesome. Another feature of Clockify is that the time tracker interfaces with a timesheet. So it helps freelancers track and bill for their time. That's a great feature for people who bill by the hour. And even if they can't bill for all their hours, tracking time lets them know the true work hours involved in a project, which sometimes gets away from us. We don't realize how much time we're spending on something. And then we can correct as we move forward next time we estimate something.
Yeah, get better at estimating by tracking exactly what it really takes you. Organizations can use Clockify to monitor attendance, manage payroll. It's easy to start and stop the clock on specific tasks. You can filter the display. You can run reports based on the work done. You can filter based on specific clients. I use it to track how long it was taking me to prep the podcast. And I can only tell you, Tracy, that I could be more efficient. It's very easy to get lost in research on a particular topic or a question because that's the fun part.
Yeah, you can't really put a price or time on inspiration, getting inspired. But I believe you, it's true. To wrap up, Clockify is the only 100% free cloud-hosted time tracking software, and it allows unlimited users. So the price is right.
Thumbs up.
I'm Tracy O'Rourke, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast.
Up next, it's Q&A. This forum question is about potential alternatives to simply providing online training for continuous improvement. Right, Tracy?
Absolutely. So today's question from one of our forum members is, online training alone is not enough to sustain our continuous improvement effort, but we don't have a travel budget for on-site training. What are our alternatives? That's a great question. And I think online training can in itself be a challenge for some organizations, especially if the level of comfort with online training is not there yet. So a lot of organizations are moving to online training for a lot of things. But again, there are sometimes situations where People are not comfortable with it, and we want to maximize the effect or the results of going through the training. So we're finding that providing online training blended with some live instruction can have a really positive impact for many organizations. It's a concept that many educational providers are considering. It's called the flipped classroom. So if you haven't heard of flipped classroom before, traditional classroom is you go to class and you listen to the lecture, and then you have to do homework on your own and try to apply it and figure it out independently. Well, the flipped classroom actually flips that concept and says, do the training independently. So go do a lecture online and go through all of that material, and then come to class to apply it. So you're not doing homework by yourself. You're actually getting the help when you go to apply the concepts into something. And we're finding it has worked very effectively. And it's really a great way to have a blended model of online and live instruction. So you could design the live instruction any way you want. We've set it up with Greenbelt, our Greenbelt program, where learners meet with an instructor at the end of each DMAIC phase. So they get 5 live sessions, and that could be an hour and a half of virtual, or it could be 3 hours on site. So it just really depends on what the client is wanting to do. We've actually helped our clients set it up, and then they do it from there. They do it on their own. They have their master black belts that are running these flipped classroom sessions. And we have found, this is the best part, that the project results are the same as on-site instruction, just as effective. So projects are being completed. They've got some decent results in lead time reductions and defect reductions. So flipped classroom approach could be a viable option for you.
I think one of the things I like about what you just described is the aspect of a network, that when you have a group call and everybody gets to hear the barriers that their colleagues and compatriots are running into, and that they're not alone, or that they ran into a barrier and they talk about how to solve it. So you get comfort, you get a little more courage that you're not alone. You have stronger connections to the people you're in the network with, on the call with. All those things are added advantages to even getting individual coaching. I think there's something great about that group aspect.
Yes. And I think the big thing that we try to focus on is when you do these live sessions, it's not a review of the material so much as application of it. So it's sort of like, okay, you guys heard about the fishbone, you've learned about the fishbone. Now we're actually going to spend the next 35 minutes building one. And so it really is about the interaction with the people that are going through the training, as well as the application to the exercises and the tools.
And you get to do some, I think coming up, you've got some interesting time zones on your hands, don't you?
Yes, I do. I have some interesting time zones that I'm going to be working in the middle of the night, because that's what time it is in Japan.
And pretty soon we'll be in Japan.
That's right.
I'm Elizabeth Swan, and you're listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. In a short while, we'll get to hear my interview with Jeff Toyster, customer service thought leader and author of the new book, Getting Service Right. We'll review his book next in the printed page.
There are some customer nightmare stories in here that I could have written myself.
I am with you. It feels like we've all been there. This month's featured book was written by customer service thought leader Jeff Toyster. It's called Getting Service Right, Overcoming the Hidden Obstacles to Outstanding Customer Service. So he's our featured guest for today's special, and he's been consulting and teaching people how to deliver great customer service for over a decade. This book tackles what he sees as the top 10 obstacles to great customer service, and he uses some familiar scenarios. One that really got me was the idea of yelling human. They're just sort of yelling into your phone going, human, reach it, please, when you're just in a torturous automated loop. Or, simply being on the receiving end of a service rep who doesn't seem to care about you at all.
I've been there.
Yeah. He mentioned systems that ask you to enter all your information, and then when you reach a service rep, they ask you to give all that information over again. That seems like a daily thing. That seems like standard, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
So when you're entering it, you're like, I'm just going to have to do this all over again. So that means you're already irritated because they're forcing you to do rework. And that is just too familiar, Tracy.
Absolutely. I teach at UC San Diego live classrooms, and one question I ask people in the class to think about is, what process have you been a victim of that it was just really bad process design and you get stuck in this horrible, as you would call, torturous loop? Maybe it's not automated, maybe it's just a torturous loop in general. And unfortunately, I have to say most consistently, the DMV comes up a lot. Other historically painful processes that a lot of customers talk about is getting the right help from banks, health insurance companies, and anything that involves procurement in any organization. Buying stuff is painful, apparently.
And it's usually as painful for them. They don't have control often of the systems that they've been handed and the process steps that they've been asked to go through to deal with you. So, and they may see a way out of it, but they may not be given a way out of it. Another obstacle he cites is when employees become what he calls double agents. So they're trying to do the right thing for you, but there's a policy that tells them they can't. And I remember trying to get a chili dog. I was at a SeaWorld in Florida, and I was hungry, and I wanted a dog with everything: onion, the chili, cheese, you name it. And she pulls out this tiny little serrated piece of tinfoil, and she starts to put the bun on it and the dog, and she starts to load it. And I'm thinking, oh, that little piece of tinfoil is not going to prevent the mess on that dog from getting on my shirt. So I said, could I get one of those little cardboard containers behind you? And she said, no, but I can give you more tinfoil. So we went back and forth a few times, and she just said, I'm sorry, I can't give you one of those, little containers. And finally I just was like, I was going to lose this battle, but I just said, why can't you give me one of those little containers? And she said, oh, well, at the end of the day, the number of those that are gone should equal how many cheese nachos I sold. So it was either inventory or theft control or some combination of the two, but it had nothing to do with me. But that was clearly the process that she was given. So there's a disconnect there. And then another a potential disconnect is between what the slogan is or the company values and what really happens in a company. And I know that you've dealt with that. You've talked about that disconnect too, haven't you?
Mm-hmm, absolutely. So there's a quote by Dr. Henry Cloud called "Culture is created by what is tolerated and what is promoted." It's one of my favorite quotes. And what leaders promote is obvious. If leaders focus on something, then employees will too. But culture is also what is tolerated or allowed that affect culture. And sometimes those things can be negative, and sometimes it's not readily apparent what leaders are allowing. Well, it's not readily apparent to them anyway. And so what are we allowing that is actually affecting the culture? And so I'll just share a quick story I had. This is probably the most appalling experience I had. I was in a hotel. I rented a conference room was rented for a training, and I was going to be there for 5 days. And I noticed that the service wasn't stellar. Every time I needed something, I had to go to the front desk. Nobody was checking on me. Nobody was coming in to see how I was doing or if I needed something. And so the first couple of times I went to the front desk, they seemed at least, attentive. And then after a couple of times of being in there, like on the Wednesday, they started to glare at me as I started walking up, and I asked for something else. And then the front desk counter person went back, and I heard him whisper to the manager, "She is a pain." I couldn't believe it. And so I even said to the manager, "I heard him say that to you." And she's like, "Oh, he didn't mean it," or something like that. Like something ridiculous, like just, really not addressing it. And it was clear to me what she was allowing. And so even if they had this idea that they were going to have great customer service, that's not what was being promoted. And they were allowing bad customer service right in front of them.
Yeah.
So that was very apparent. And that's what I'm guessing is what he meant when he says that there's values, but sometimes they don't really happen.
Yeah. I think where you say culture is what's tolerated, service culture is what's tolerated. It's the same in the service world as it is in the process improvement world, or just the organizational culture at large. Culture is what's tolerated. He also focuses on the need for clear purpose. If employees aren't clear on the organization's mission or they don't buy into it, then the customer service will suffer there too. So he has lots of remedies for what goes into good customer service. And it's fun because, sometimes he's in there mapping with them and doing root cause analysis and letting customer service have a hand in remedying bad processes, which we know that's the only way out. And bottom line, he just says companies constantly underestimate what goes into excellent service. They just don't think about how much work that really is and what goes into it. So it's a great book, lots of practical advice. Stay tuned for the interview and check out my full in-depth review on our site.
Thanks for writing that review, Elizabeth. I'm sure it's a great one.
Thank you, Tracy.
Okay, it's time to announce the coupon code.
This code is for 20% off any of our Lean Six Sigma training and certification courses. That's white belt, yellow belt, green belt, black belt, and lean training.
And if you've just joined us at the Just in Time Cafe, just use coupon code 20YERBA. That's 20YERBA during checkout. Make sure to use it soon since the coupon code will expire at the end of May. Coming up next, it's today's special. Elizabeth, give us a little preview of your interview with Jeff Toyster.
Jeff is full of great wisdom, but the interview starts with kind of a meta customer service failure involving the first publishing of his book. And the fact that the original name of the book was Service Failure. So it's a great story. He's a good storyteller and he gives some great advice. So stay tuned. For today's special, I'm excited to have customer service thought leader Jeff Toyster with us at the cafe. He's the author of Getting Service Right, just out this month. Welcome, Jeff.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It's so nice to be here in the cafe. And just for realism, I do have the last remnants of my coffee still in my cup, saving it for this conversation.
Oh, I'm jealous. I don't have any coffee at all. Jeff's mission is to help customer service teams unlock their hidden potential. He is a best-selling author with 2 other books on customer service. He's been recognized as a top customer service thought leader by Global Gurus, ICMI, and Com100. More than 140,000 people on 6 continents have taken his video-based training courses on LinkedIn Learning, aka lynda.com. When I started reading Jeff's latest book, my Lean Six Sigma alarms all started going off with all the synergy. So I asked Jeff to come and visit that cafe and talk about that with me. So lucky he's game. Thanks for visiting us, Jeff.
I really appreciate it. And I should share with you, which I think you might know, but maybe your listeners, I know just enough about Lean and Six Sigma to be dangerous.
I totally can read that in the book, but I think you're doing a pretty good job, and I think listeners would agree. So one thing, speaking of continuous improvement realm, the origins of your latest book are somewhat of a meta example of what can go wrong with customer service. So can you give our listeners a little bit of your backstory?
Sure. So Getting Service Right is a second edition. And it's nice when we get a second chance to do things. So the first edition of the book, it had a different title. It was called Service Failure. And my thought process when I initially published the book was I was speaking to the individual leader who was really flummoxed with, how do I get my employees to deliver great customer service? And I've tried all this training and different ideas and incentive programs, and it just doesn't work consistently. And the title really did resonate with that reader. But what I did not understand, I did not really understand my customer, which is a cardinal sin in any business. And I committed it as the author. The person buying the book was not necessarily the individual leader. They were someone who was probably going to buy a book and then hand them out, let's say, to the leadership team. And over again, I heard leaders say, hey, great book. I'm not giving a book called Service Failure out to everybody on my team. So I kind of doomed myself with sales, and then had insult to injury. There was a publishing problem where due to an issue with the book binding, you would open up a brand new book and pages would literally fall out. And I promise you that I did not intend for the book to be an interactive experience, yet that's exactly what happened. You'd get the book, pages would fall out, and you go, oh, I see what he did there. It was completely on accident. And the worst part about it was my my publisher was kind of like that James Caan character from Elf, where the book was missing 2 pages, and he's like, it's going to cost too much. My publisher basically said the same thing. Yeah, we'll fix that, but it's going to cost too much. So we'll print new books, but any books that are out there sold by Amazon or Barnes and Noble, that's just what it is. So that was a tough experience, and I try to learn from all of those lessons with the second edition.
Well, I'm really glad you got a do-over because it got me to read the book. And there's a lot in this book. There's wonderful examples. There's great insights, tons of solutions to really common customer service issues. And we could talk about those for a very long time, but we have a shorter window. So I'm going to dive in and begin with what I found to be the same focus that we apply in the continuous improvement world. And that's to consider the purpose. You know, in our world, it's definitely the purpose of the organization, but then you can dial it down to the purpose of an improvement effort. Like, why are we doing this? And hopefully you can then cascade back up to how that fits with the purpose of the organization. And the question is, why does the organization exist? And you're probably familiar with Simon Sinek, who says, start with why. And you point out that that's a starting point for customer service reps too. If they don't really understand or connect with the business, that generally translates to poor service. So have I got that right?
You have, and it's probably, if I could point to one thing that would make service better in any organization, it would be to take time to think about that why, and not only the why, but the what. So why are we doing this? But what does that look like? And unfortunately, if you think about most customer service jobs and jobs, whether you and I have had, jobs your listeners have had, they all tend to be oriented around process. So you learn this is the transaction, this is the process, these are the steps. But no one ever stops to think and discuss the thing we all take for granted, which is, what does great service look like? And because we never really calibrate, what does the end result look like? What do the desirable behaviors actually look like? Then the employee's kind of stuck to their own devices. And as an individual, my why or my purpose might be vastly different than my boss's intentions, what my boss wants me to do, or what the company owner wants me to do. And because we never spend time clarifying that, then you often get a bunch of random behaviors that are dictated by other things like process.
Yeah, you made a great point. I think you're trying to help people separate the tasks they do from why they're doing them. And I think you had a nice example of, when customers call in with, a technology problem, they're basically looking for relief. So your customer service rep is trying to provide that relief. That's, like you said, it's not just a task, like here's the solution. It's you're helping them feel that.
And what I like about that example is it's an example that so often goes wrong. When you call in for technical support, there's a really good chance that the person on the other end has a timer in front of them, and they're held to a standard in terms of how long they can spend on the phone with you, or they have X number of emails they have to respond to. So we push them into a process mode. I talked to one technical support rep, and she said, I have 6 minutes to fix this issue. I don't have time to try to make them feel better. I just have to tell them what to do. And that's that's really difficult because we know that customers are a lot less compliant when they're upset. They're less open to ideas. And so it's almost counterintuitive, but if you don't help them feel better, you probably won't fully solve their issue. You can't dig into the heart of it, and you certainly won't create a great experience. Yet the typical support job is really oriented around process and timing and efficiency. And the person like that poor support rep just isn't put in a position to really make customers feel great on a consistent basis.
Yeah, to pair the efficiency with effectiveness, which could involve lots of different things based on what they're trying to do. It's funny when you say the 6 minutes. I think there's been times, I've been hung up on, and I don't think anyone was mad. I think they just hit their time quota. They just said, I can't stay on the phone. This is just going to make me look bad. So that suddenly there was nobody at the other end.
That actually happens. And here's a scary part. And I've learned this from talking to frontline agents. So that happens, they'll hang up on you. But the thing that customer service leaders aren't always aware of is if things are going well and I'm not in danger of running afoul of my time limit, if you will, then agents will often take longer than necessary because they perceive they have more time. So it's a strange phenomenon. When you give them, let's say 6 minutes, that's your average, they look at it more as an absolute, like every call has to get to about 6 minutes. And so you often end up wasting time on half your calls because you feel you can. It's a very strange way that we react to that time limit, and it's usually not good.
Yeah, it becomes not a limit, but a target. I got to hit that. Like, how close can I get to 6? Which is, like you said, that's not the point.
Yeah.
So you talk about this front line, the experience they're having, the disconnect between kind of what their role is and what their task is versus what the goal is. And so what came to me was, in continuous improvement efforts, we start by trying to truly understand the voice of the customer. And a lot of what's happening on the front lines with customer service reps is that they're hearing it. They are hearing it firsthand. So, but you point out that it often doesn't go anywhere. Nobody else hears that voice of the customer. Have I got that right?
You do. And I'm sure you've done this before. I'm sure most of your listeners have, that you'll be frustrated about a product or a service or an issue, and you'll tell the person serving you, I have some feedback for you. I think, this product is really difficult to assemble. And you'll hear a bit of an awkward silence, which is them absorbing the feedback and then knowing in their inner heart that, yeah, I've heard this, all day, every day, and no one's going to listen. So it's a little bit frustrating because that's where the majority of the feedback goes. Yet customer service leaders don't often spend enough time just asking people on the front lines, what are you hearing? And the really sad part is, almost every company, it feels like, does a survey these days. You think, well, at least they're capturing this data via survey. I'm going to really share my feedback. And the dirty secret in the customer service world is that most of the surveys we fill out are used for nothing more than reporting an average number in a management meeting. They're not actually using that data to take action. So the feedback we share as customers, unfortunately, is often meaningless, and companies are bypassing a gold mine of process improvement opportunities.
Yeah, the average, we deal with that too, that the average doesn't give the real experience of the customer, the variation in the absolute experience, I think is what you described it as. And what do you see as solutions to that kind of disconnect between, here's this incredible wealth of information, what all your customers are saying, and then here's this average number going into a report and being reported at a meeting, which doesn't help anybody? Do you see people who really nail it and get good at that, get good at funneling that frontline experience back up top?
There are a lot of companies that really nail it. And, one exercise I think anyone can do immediately is something that I call the iceberg, or the iceberg hunt. And what this is, you could start with one data point that doesn't make sense. So as an example, a customer service leader got an escalated call from a customer who was upset about a billing issue. And the billing issue had happened before. The customer called in, and the rep had gone through the necessary steps and said, okay, we fixed this. And yet it happened again. So now the customer is really frustrated. So the iceberg is, what you see above the surface is kind of hiding a bigger, angrier problem below the surface. And this customer service leader said, I'm looking at this account and everything was done correctly, yet the error still happened. I think what most people do is they just fix the error and then go on with their day, but that data point doesn't line up. In other words, the customer service leader couldn't explain why it happened again. And so in many businesses, you'll encounter these things where you can't explain why the problem happened. You don't understand the root cause. You don't know whether it's likely to happen again. And so you should investigate from that one data point. And come to find out, this customer had complained, but they actually had the same billing issue in a special set of circumstances, and it was costing the company $50,000 a year. And the fix was about one line of code that someone on the development team needed to add to the billing system. And that was it. But I don't think they would have discovered it if that customer service leader had not initially said, wait, this story doesn't add up. I don't understand why this is happening. I better go investigate. And so I think that's something that anybody can do with just one data point.
You said root cause, Jeff. That's my language. And also you kind of bring up a point that we run into, which is people have time to do it twice, but they don't have time to do it right. Taking that effort to go dig and, figure out what that one line of code, how it was going to solve it. The other thing you talk about, you give some good examples of giving customer service reps some control over their environments. That feeling of helplessness and often learned helplessness that, one of the ways to counteract that is to let customer service reps fix stuff. So you gave an example of an Amazon shipping practice with something called SLAM labels. Do you want to describe that example for our listeners?
Sure. So I was fortunate to get to tour an Amazon distribution center or fulfillment center. And it was a fascinating process to see what Amazon did to make sure that almost any order you place is going to get to you on time and it's going to be right. How do they do that? And one thing was called their SLAM machine. So essentially what this was it was kind of the last point where it would put the shipping label on it, and the technology would weigh the package, and the computer would compare the weight of the package to the weight of the expected packaging and the weight of the content. So all of those already had pre-measured weights. And what was cool about it is if the weights were off, it would kick out the package for additional inspection. And if they were correct, then it would route it down the right chute for the correct shipper, the correct shipment truck, et cetera. So while I was on this tour, I saw the machine go a little haywire, and suddenly it started kicking out, you expect maybe one or two packages every now and then. It started kicking out every other package. And what was really interesting was the operators noticed this. They stopped the machine immediately, and they took a moment to kind of look at it. I couldn't figure out instantly what the issue was. And this particular machine had kind of two paths. So they shut down one path. They figured out it was one path that was kicking out every package. So they restarted the second path. And the first path, they called over some expert help, and they immediately dove into the issue so that they could fix it. I thought that was such a great example of, before this gets out of control, let's stop the line, let's fix the issue, because each one of those packages represented a potential angry and upset customer, and they're preventing the problem before it ever happens.
Yeah, so you're very clear that these guys are sort of the recipients of upstream processes like you just described. And in that one, they gave their workers the ability to have something we would call an and-on, like they are allowed to stop the line. And another one, it's funny because I toured an Amazon call center, and another practice, because now they're at the end of what would happen if those packages, went out and shouldn't have. But they have the ability that if they get a problem, if the call service rep gets a problem with a product and it happens twice, then they can pull the buy button right off the site. So again, they have the ability to do an and-on, and then same thing, they get together, figure out, who do they need to figure out what that problem is, fix it, and then until it's fixed, the buy button stays off. So how great would it be to implement that customer service and-on in your world?
There's so many applications for that. I think that's one of the things that customers don't always realize. If you're contacting customer service, the person you're talking to, in many cases, is not actually resolving your issue. They're leaving instructions in a computer system for someone else to resolve it, and that facility might be physically located in a completely different place. Or even, a simple face-to-face interaction. If you're in a restaurant, the server is kind of bearing the brunt of a poorly prepared meal. But it's the problem that happened in the kitchen. Yet if the server isn't able to directly go into the kitchen and share with the chef, here's what the complaint was. Maybe the chef doesn't understand what he or she is doing wrong or doing that's not to the customer's liking. So you're right. There's so many opportunities for that. Unfortunately, what happens most of the time is customer service leaders feel that they are paid to be leaders, and that means jumping into action and running to solutions. And I see this time and time again. When a problem happens, instead of in your world, instead of going to the Gemba, it is let's lock ourselves in a conference room and brainstorm solutions without even understanding the problem. And that's often where a lot of these so-called fixes get decided upon and implemented. And that's also why they often don't work.
So, I'm glad you brought that up. So that's a host of issues right there. and yeah, what we'd call going to the Gemba. And you've also got the phrase management by walking around. I can't remember where that came from, but I remember hearing that before I heard go to the Gemba or go to where the work takes place. And that's what you obviously are advising leaders to do. Get in there, see what's going on. At Amazon, I don't know if it's a common term, but they had the split ins. So if suddenly call volume spiked, then managers would just get on, split into the calls to hear what are the calls about. What is everyone, why is the call volume going up? And we'll listen to find out what it is. So that's a way of going to the Gemba, right? Going right to the phone calls.
Yeah, it's often in the contact center world, it's called split in or Y jacking, because literally it's the shape of a Y where you can plug another headset in. The challenge that a lot of organizations have is what we would think would be common sense for a manager to spend more time with their team. That manager's probably stretched thin with a lot of different reporting responsibilities. Their span of control might be so large that they can only listen to 3 or 4 calls per person on their team per month. And so sometimes we often put leaders in a position where it's very difficult for them to be really good leaders because they're doing so many other things.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Yeah, it's no one of these people can be called out as you're the culprit. It's basically the system that they're working within, which we often, see the same thing. But you recognize it's the people that are on the front line that are hearing the problems, and what if they could do something about it? So you mentioned in some cases you're able to sit with customer service reps and do some mapping, ask key questions, look upstream, and try to do some root cause analysis. So how do service reps respond to doing those classic continuous improvement techniques?
They love it. I've never come across a customer service professional. I won't say never. Let's say 99.9% of the time, if you ask a customer service professional for their input, they're not going to be afraid to share if they believe you're taking them seriously. And so customer service professionals love to give their input, and they often have really good ideas for solving problems. And I'll give such a simple example. I worked with a university, and I was working particularly with their parking department. And parking in any college campus is really difficult, and you often encounter people with this kind of a lost look. Well, I don't know if you've ever tried to give someone directions, but there's a weird thing about giving people directions. After 2 turns, their eyes cloud over, and they're kind of like, oh, okay, I guess I'll go find it. And so people in the front lines were realizing this was an issue, and somebody had the idea that, hey, we have these printed campus maps. If I see someone with that lost look, I can give them a map and even take a pen out and say, okay, you're here, and let me draw an arrow to where you're going. Because after 2 turns, they're going to forget everything I told them anyways, but now at least they have a map to help guide them. That's something that you don't need a leader to come up with that idea. You just need a leader to recognize, oh, someone on the team has figured out a good solution. Let me liberate that solution from that one person and allow them to share it with everybody else if that's going to be a best practice.
Yeah.
Love that.
That is awesome. And also, that's a great story because you just relieved me of my embarrassment of not being able to remember directions and assuming there's a whole world of people out there that know what's being said after the second turn. Like, that's just not happening. That's a really great example. Another thing you pointed out was even if customer service reps could recite a company's customer service values, like people think, let's find a good mnemonic. Let's recite them all the time. Let's make sure that anyone on a dime could tell us what our values are and that's where it goes. But then you'd say, just because they recite them didn't mean they knew what they were meant, that they hadn't been operationally defined. Like, what does that mean? What does that value mean in practice?
I came across some research recently that said the word integrity is the number 1 most used corporate value. In fact, Enron, a company, I don't know if everyone still remembers Enron, but from many years ago now, one of the hugest accounting scandals ever. And Enron, one of their core values was integrity. So just because you put a value on a website or a wall doesn't mean that it has any actual meaning to employees or guides their day to day. I once worked with a credit union where they had instilled a set of values, one of which ironically was integrity. And they hired me to figure out, well, okay, how well are we doing? What are our next steps? And I found two things that were very interesting. One was they did a great job sharing the values. Everybody in the organization could recite 4 out of 5, and 95% of the employees could get 5 out of 5. No problem. So that was great. But there was no agreement as to what behaviors align with those values. So in other words, what does integrity look like? Even the executive team at this credit union disagreed as to what we really meant. And so employees often, if you're on the front lines, you often see these values and they sound good, but there's a difference between stated values and actual values. And actual values are the real norms that guide our thinking and behavior in the workplace. And so if by integrity you mean always do the right thing for our customer, our member, yet you're constantly creating policies that are unfriendly and anti-customer, then you don't have integrity as a core value, truly. You have something else. Maybe it's all about the bottom line would be our core value. And that disconnect, I think, not only do executives face the disconnect in their thinking, but frontline employees are brutally aware of it because they're being, hey, integrity. And then they see this policy that's definitely anti-integrity. And it really rubs them the wrong way. They sense the hypocrisy. And yet they're being told, well, this is how you have to go to work every day. It's a tough thing to be asked to do.
It is. I mean, they recognize the lie. I took that to heart because we worked not just at the top of our organization, but we invited everyone to collaborate on what our core values were. So I feel really good that we all contributed and I feel strong about them. But of course, everyone has turnover or just grow. We have new people coming on. And I realized when I read that, I was thinking, we need to work with folks so that we operationally define what does that mean, in practice from your position. What does that mean, to have that value? I know what it is for me, but what is it for each position? So that was a great eye opener. And then just in general, I found myself in just totally enjoying the real life customer service stories you told about experiences you've had, mainly with your wife, Sally. And I found that most of them involved steak, burgers, red wine, and maybe some cheese. So they're all like, that sounds like a nice night. But you learn a lot just by being a customer yourself, don't you?
I do. And that's one of the things I try to do in the book. I think as a customer, or even as a customer service leader, we see an employee do the wrong thing and we kind of smack our forehead and go, why? Why did you do this? It's so obvious what you should have done. And so I took that into the book and I shared personal experiences and stories. And I used each one to reveal a why. Because yes, the employee in this situation did not do what I as the customer would expect. Great. But the fact is they didn't do the right thing. We have to understand why. If I'm a customer service leader, I want to help my employees be better. I need to understand why they're doing it the wrong way. And that leads to all sorts of interesting insights into what's driving behavior. So you mentioned steak, for example. I had an experience, and I share this in the book, where my wife, Sally, and I are out to dinner, and both of our steaks are completely overcooked. And our server, we hadn't even bit into it. We both took a slice and said, oh boy, these are way, way overdone. Our server comes to check on us. She sees it instantly. And I think she's doing a pretty good job of working with us to resolve the problem. And suddenly this guy appears and he just inserts himself into the conversation. He doesn't introduce himself. He just starts arguing with us about whether or not our steaks are overcooked. Well, come to find out, he's the general manager of the restaurant. And everything he did was completely wrong, but he's the leader setting a poor example for his server. So we finally got him to admit that the steaks were overcooked. So he agrees to refire new steaks. Well, the next steaks come out completely undercooked. In fact, mine was really, really raw. And I noticed they had these little wooden flags on them that tell you what the temperature is supposed to be. I'd asked for mine to be medium rare. And the flag the second time said rare. And so again, the server comes over. She didn't know that the general manager had put them in at the wrong temperature. So now she's really embarrassed that the manager is undercutting her. He comes over again and starts arguing with me that I didn't know the difference between rare and medium rare, and that's why he did it on purpose. So you have these, you ask yourselves why. In this case, this is a general manager who has decided at the beginning of the conversation that Sally and I are idiots, and he's going to have to treat us like idiots for us to be happy. That makes that server's job almost impossible.
It does. And I think that story also, in many of your stories, your compassion for the customer service person is very real. Even when they're hostile, abusive, you're always looking for, what brought them to be hostile or abusive or indifferent. And some of it is they're being led by someone who is like the manager that you just described, or they are at the mercy of really bad processes that send stuff out late and wrong, and they're just fielding all these angry, sad calls. So I think you also have compassion for, kind of middle management and directors, like what are they at the mercy of? And just looking at this holistically. So I appreciate that the solutions really do try to get at the root and, try to help everybody solve some of these kind of just systemic issues. And just a lot of it, you cite a lot of great studies and stats around human nature, why people behave the way they do. So I really appreciate that. It's a well done book. It's incredibly helpful, jam-packed with good stuff. So the book is out now, but how can somebody find or communicate with you if they wanted to, Jeff?
I try to be really easy to find. I think I'm the only person named Jeff Toyster. So probably the easiest way to find me, to find how to email me or call me to find the book is my website, toystersolutions.com, TOISTER solutions.com. And one thing that I do in every book that I've written now is I put my email address and my phone number right in the book and invite people to call me, email me, or text me, because I really do want to be available.
Much appreciated. And I'm very jealous that there's only one person named Jeff Toyster. If you put Elizabeth Swann into Google, you're going to see 100 images of Keira Knightley as the pirate bride in Pirates of the Caribbean. So you've been listening to the Just in Time Cafe podcast. My guest today has been Jeff Toyster, president of Toyster Solutions and author of his latest book, Getting Service Right, Overcoming the Hidden Obstacles to Outstanding Customer Service. This is an invaluable guide for customer service leaders with a wealth of practical advice. I got a ton of great ideas reading it. Thank you so much for visiting us with us today, Jeff.
Well, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
We reached out to some of last year's Wonder Women of Quality to see what they were up to. So be sure to check that out. And Tracy and I are leaving for Japan in a few weeks, and we'll be posting on LinkedIn and Twitter from our tours. And when we're back, we'll have lots to tell you about the study trip with Katie Anderson. So stay tuned for all of that.
And tune into our next episode where Elizabeth interviews Erin Baumgartner, who was featured on a recent TEDx talk addressing the wastes of overproduction and transportation in the food industry.
Remember to rinse out your coffee cup before you join us again at the Just in Time Cafe.
See you in 2 weeks.